Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn, and welcome to another episode of The Chamber Within. It is said that experience is the best teacher, and I now know why. Here's what I've learned after the many questions I've had about my own life experiences and self judgment. I remember going through a very difficult time in my marriage, and when it was finally over, I was actually upset with myself for having gone through what I experienced. I was actually upset with myself for not knowing better and not doing better way earlier. Now, this version of me right now knows that it is a complete waste of time to say I should have known better or acted differently. That would defeat the lesson, the purpose of the experience. Feeling negatively about learning a life lesson is judging yourself for what you couldn't have possibly known sooner. The only way to learn is through living, full immersion, because it requires you to make decisions that you didn't have to previously make. The growth happens through our trials. Any experience you go through is going to not only teach you about life, yeah, that's a given, but it'll ultimately teach you about your own character. You learn a lot about yourself, what you're willing to learn through, what you're willing to deal with, and how you see yourself. Your self-concept is your compass. It's your guiding light, how you see yourself. Every experience reveals something about you. It shows where your boundaries are, what you're afraid of, what you're willing to tolerate, what you are capable of surviving, and sometimes strengths you never knew you possessed to begin with. Here's what hindsight has taught me. Judging yourself for what you've been through is a lot like wondering why a freshman doesn't start the school year with a degree. That's because you didn't know much of anything, baby. You haven't earned it yet. The person you are now is not who you will become after living through enriching life experiences. Some experiences are enjoyable and others are painful, but I'll use the blanket term enrichment to describe both. Making mistakes, being hard on yourself, and wishing things had been different are often signs you've already outgrown the older version of yourself, the version that existed before those lessons. Now, the identity you've accepted for yourself, the self-concept that I just spoke of, determines what you're willing to accept from life. We rarely live above the story we believe about who we are. Someone who believes in themselves accepts a high-paying position without question. Of course, they'd pay me that much. Versus someone who is equally qualified but has serious confidence issues. Now, that person will most likely not even apply. That's what I mean about self-concept, how you see yourself. And you can learn a lot about your self-concept by your trials, your experiences, your struggles, and also the choices that you make. It's feedback. Experience is the best teacher because we learn how to navigate our world differently. We move through this world like a maze. We don't know what the next turn holds. And as we age, our circumstances and obligations also change. We know who we are as a young adult. We meet someone, we know who we are as a spouse. We have a family. Okay, I'm learning who I am as a parent. Oopsie, I made some mistakes. I'm learning how to be a better parent, a better spouse, a better adult, a better worker. Oopsie, I lost everything. Therefore, I now know who I am as someone who has failed many things and has had to start over again. Therefore, I know who I am as someone who has fallen short of my own expectations and lost everything, which can be tough. I know, but the good news is if you allow it, all of these experiences work for you, for us. And if you just have that perception that all of these things are working for you, for us, it'll help you to keep going. Knowledge can be borrowed and feel safe. I know this because someone told me. I read it in a book. I saw a documentary on that. Wisdom, however, is earned. and says, I know how that feels. I know how it affects the mental state, the body, and then ultimately how to get through it. Now, I have a really funny story. Years and years ago, when I was a young teen, my mother said to me, just but in passing, telling a story, giving birth feels like you have to go to the bathroom. And as a mother of five, I looked at my mom and I'm thinking, surely she's leaving out crucial details to this event. Explicit biological details have now been described as a casual trip to the bathroom. I always thought that she was not only wrong, but a little delusional about the whole process. Yes, a mother of five just described having a child, giving birth, was the same as the urgency to go to the bathroom. That's how arrogant I was as a teen. She doesn't know what she's talking about. But of course, I didn't say that out loud. I was arrogant, not stupid. I wouldn't dare. Also, she was the only person that ever described it in that way. What am I to think about her experience other than to question it and say, no, ma'am, there has to be more? It sounded ridiculous. But my experience when I was in labor years later was that after a few hours of contractions, they had subsided long enough for me to all of a sudden get a sensation of needing to urgently use the restroom. I looked over to the left and was saying, at the same time I was scooting off of the table and trying to get all these things off of me and get out of the bed, hey, I have to use the restroom. Can I get some help? Both of the nurses began to yell and run towards me. No, the baby is coming. One poked her head out of the room, looking left and right like she was watching for traffic. I was like, where's the doctor? I was confused. I just told them I had to go to the bathroom. I had never, ever been denied a trip to the lavatory. Well, okay, other than Catholic school when I was in second grade. But this was a ridiculous reaction. I thought the nurses had lost their minds. I'm thinking, I'm trying not to make a mess here. Can you please help me? Lo and behold, a few minutes later, the doctor came in. I gave birth to my daughter. Now, there was a trip to be made, but it wasn't me to the bathroom. It was my daughter. She was well into the birth canal, ready to make her way into this world. Silly me. That's my experience. And my mother telling me, and me being hard-headed towards someone who had experienced this 5 times, was knowledge. Knowledge that was ignored and wasn't really learned until I went through it myself. I hadn't connected the dots until after that day, but that sensation is the final stage. After all of the labor and all of that, the labor pains and contractions, that's the final stage when the baby is bearing down the birth canal. This is why experience is the best teacher. I'm sorry I doubted you, Mom. People can talk to you until they are blue in the face. You can read about many places, foods, climates, different cultures, all sorts of things on this earth. But until you experience it yourself, you wouldn't truly understand. You just wouldn't. What was something you were completely wrong about until you had experienced it for yourself and truly learned your lesson? You can email me at thechamberwithin@yahoo.com, or you can leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/the chamber voice line. Thank you for joining me this week, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.